Right after we lowered my husband into the ground, his best friend leaned in and whispered 5 words that changed everything I believed about the man I loved. He wasn't who you thought. Just that. 5 words. Soft enough that no one else could hear, but loud enough that they've lived in my head every single day since. Let me ask you something. Have you ever thought you knew someone completely, only to realize you didn't know them at all? Like, not even a little? Comment yes or no below. I'm reading every single one. And if this already hits you in the gut even a little, don't scroll, like the video. And subscribe so you never miss another story that hits like this. Now let me tell you what happened. I met Alaric Anthony when I was 22, and thought love was just supposed to feel like fire. But he wasn't fired. He was quiet, calm, safe. And I didn't know until years later that safety can be the most addictive kind of love. He made everything feel possible. We bought a small blue house with a crooked mailbox. He fixed it 3 times before finally giving in and replacing it with one that looked like a barn. Said it gave the house character. We got a dog, then a baby. We named her Ariella, and for 20 years, that was my world. Coffee with 2 sugars, Saturdays at the farmer's market, that one jazz playlist he always played too loud when he cooked. Alaric was the kind of man people trusted instantly. He just had that energy, warm, steady, like someone who'd never lie to your face. But here's the thing about people who make you feel safe. You don't double-check them. You don't question the little things. You don't look for cracks in the walls until the whole house starts caving in. At his funeral, everything blurred. The smell of lilies made me sick. The speeches made me feel like I'd walked into someone else's memory of him. And then, Valentine Bird, his best friend, the brother he never had, the guy who'd been there through everything. Birthdays, vacations, even the night Ariella was born. He hugged me a little longer than everyone else. His eyes were red, not just from crying, but from something else. Guilt, maybe, I don't know. And then he leaned in so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath, and he whispered. He wasn't who you thought. Just that. No explanation, no apology. Then he stepped back and walked away like he hadn't just ripped a hole through the center of my chest. I didn't move. I couldn't. My ears were ringing, and I just stood there, in this stupid black dress, staring at the ground like it might give me answers. Everyone says grief is like a wave, but that day, it didn't come in waves. It was just one long, brutal flood. And Valentine's words? They didn't drift away with the flowers or the people or the pastor's final prayer. They stayed. So I did what anyone would do when they hear something that shakes their whole world. I pretended I didn't hear it. I went home. I made tea. I tucked Ariella into bed like nothing had shifted. But inside I was already unraveling. Because once you hear something like that, you start replaying everything. Every late night, every canceled trip, every weird moment you brushed off as nothing. And trust me, it doesn't take long before nothing starts to look a lot like something. You ever look back at your life and think, was it really perfect, or was I just too in love to see the flaws? Because that's where I keep landing. I used to brag about how lucky I got with Alaric. Not out loud, really, but in little ways. Like when I'd see other couples fighting in grocery stores, and I'd smile because that just wasn't us. We didn't slam doors, we didn't throw blame, he didn't raise his voice, not even once. Alaric Anthony made me feel like I was home, even when we were lost. We were married for 20 years, not flashy years, not Instagram perfect, but real ones. We had routines, traditions. He'd bring home these awful licorice candies from that weird store by the pharmacy because he knew I hated them, but he thought it was hilarious to watch me eat one by accident. Every December 19th, we'd eat pancakes for dinner because that was the night he first told me he loved me, and I'd been making pancakes. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like ours. Like something we built from the ground up, brick by little emotional brick. And then there was Valentine Bird. Tall, kind, laughed with his whole chest, always had that cool uncle vibe Ariella loved. He was around so often, people assumed we were some big extended family. He and Alaric met in high school, football teammates turned business partners turned brothers in everything but blood. I'll be honest, I never fully clicked with Valentine. Not in a hostile way, but in that way where someone just feels a little too good at blending in. He was funny, but vague. Present, but distant. Especially with me. There were times I'd catch him looking at Alaric, and it felt like he was trying to say something he didn't know how to say. But I ignored it. Because people don't question the friend who's always been there. You just let them be there. And then there was Ariella, our girl, our miracle. We tried for years, and then suddenly, there she was. All 6 pounds, 3 ounces of soft cheeks and chaos. She had Alaric's nose and my eyes. But her spirit? That was all her own. Curious, quiet, always watching. Even as a kid, she noticed things I didn't. Once when she was 6, she said, "Daddy looks sad when he smiles at you sometimes." I laughed it off, told her he was just tired. But I remember the way she looked at me, like she didn't believe me but didn't want to make me sad. I think about that now more than I should. There were little things, looking back. Late-night texts he'd never open in front of me, sudden business trips, a perfume I didn't wear lingering faintly on the collar of his coat, but I told myself it was probably mine. Or someone at the office. And the biggest one? He stopped writing in his notebook. Alaric used to keep this little black journal with thoughts, jokes, lists of songs to show Ariella when she got older. He used to write in it every day. And then, he didn't. Just one day, it sat untouched. When I asked about it, he said, "I guess I've run out of things worth writing down." And he smiled like that was normal. But it didn't feel normal. Still, I didn't push. Because that's what trust looks like, right? You don't press too hard. You don't pry. You just love. You keep loving. And I did. God, I did. He loved deeply. But now I wonder, who was he really loving? Because whatever Valentine whispered that day at the funeral, it didn't just shake the version of Alaric I buried. It shattered the version I'd been married to. The day we buried Alaric, the sky didn't cry for me. It was bright, clear, almost offensively cheerful. Like the world just moved on. People kept saying things like, "He was so loved," or "He's in a better place," as if that meant anything to a woman holding her daughter's hand while they lowered her world into the ground. I wasn't crying. I couldn't. Everything inside me was just locked up. Like if I started crying, I'd never stop. I remember Ariella squeezing my hand so tight, her knuckles went white. She didn't say a word. 16 years old, and already knowing silence sometimes says more than anything. She didn't look at the casket. She just looked at me, and then... Valentin. He'd been standing off to the side the whole time. No eulogy, no speech, just this quiet, uncomfortable presence. Eyes on the ground, hands in his pockets, like he didn't know where to stand. I kept watching him, in between pretending I was okay. He wasn't like everyone else. Everyone else looked devastated. Valentin just looked distracted, like he was carrying something else entirely. He hugged a few people, shook a few hands, and then he came toward me. Now, let me be clear. Valentine had hugged me 1,000 times over the years. Birthdays, holidays, Ariella's recitals. But this time felt different. His arms wrapped around me with a kind of urgency, not comfort, more like guilt. And right as he pulled away, he leaned in, his voice barely a whisper in my ear, and said, "He wasn't who you thought." Just that. No explanation, no follow-up, no context. 5 words. And then he stepped back and walked away. Straight to the bar table near the tents, and poured himself a full glass of something dark. I stood there, frozen, like I hadn't just heard the most soul-splitting sentence of my life. What does that even mean? He wasn't who I thought? Was it a warning? A confession? A threat? Was he drunk? Grieving? Lying? Or was it true? I turned to look for Valentin, but by then he was gone, disappeared into the crowd of suits and sunglasses and sad, polite smiles. And suddenly the funeral wasn't about goodbye anymore. It was about the question buzzing in my ears louder than the hymns. What did he mean? I wanted to ask someone. Anyone. But how do you bring that up in the middle of your husband's memorial? Hey, quick thing, his best friend just whispered something shady about him. Should I be concerned? No. You don't ask that. You smile. You accept the casserole dishes. You thank people for coming. You pretend everything isn't unraveling inside your chest. But from that moment forward, my grief wasn't just about losing Alaric. It was about losing the version of him I thought I knew. The version I loved. The version I married. The version I thought died honest. And now I didn't know who I was mourning. The first week after the funeral was a blur. People stopped by with casseroles and banana bread. They stayed for 10 minutes, said something nice about Alaric, then shuffled back to their cars like grief was contagious. The only person who didn't disappear was Ariella. She stopped sleeping in her room. She'd curl up on the couch with a blanket and her headphones on, like she didn't trust the house to feel normal without him in it. And I guess neither did I. One night, I walked into the kitchen to grab some tea, just out of habit. Alaric used to make it for me. Jasmine, 2 spoons of honey, no lemon. Always said lemon made it taste like soap. I hadn't made it since he died. But that night, I did. And as I stood there staring at the kettle, Ariella walked in, hair in a bun, hoodie too big, eyes too sharp for a teenager. She leaned against the counter and asked, "Do you think Dad was hiding something?" Just like that. No build-up, no warning. And I swear my breath caught so hard I almost dropped the mug. I didn't answer right away, because I didn't want to lie. But I didn't want to tell her the truth either, because I didn't even know the truth yet. I finally said, "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. Didn't look at me when she said, "Because you've been walking around like you're scared of what you'll find." And she wasn't wrong, because the truth is, I was scared. Scared that the version of Alaric I buried wasn't real. Scared that Valentine knew more than he said. Scared of what I'd see if I looked too hard. A few nights later, I was trying to find the spare charger Alaric always kept in his nightstand. Top drawer, glasses, old receipts, a mint that expired in 2019. Bottom drawer, a stack of envelopes, mostly junk, credit card offers, medical bills, but one of them stood out. A plain white envelope. No address. Just a name written in handwriting I knew like the back of my hand, Valentine. My heart dropped. I didn't even open it at first, I just held it there like it might burn through my skin, because I didn't know what I was more afraid of. What it said, or why he never sent it. The next morning, I called Valentine. No answer. I texted. Nothing. I waited a day, then another. On the 3rd day, I drove to his place. He didn't answer the door, even though his car was in the driveway. So I waited, sat on his porch for 2 hours like some ghost of a life he used to know. And when he finally opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept since the funeral. His voice was flat when he said, "I knew you'd find it." We didn't go inside. We just stood there, me holding the envelope, him holding the kind of silence that says everything you don't want to hear. I asked him, "Was there someone else?" He didn't flinch, didn't lie, didn't try to soften it. He just looked at me and said, "He had someone else, Macy." I told him to end it. I don't know if he ever did. I can't describe the feeling that followed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was this free fall. Like someone cut the floor out from under me, and I just kept falling through memory after memory. Alaric's smile, his Sunday pancakes, the way he looked at me on our 15th anniversary. And all I could think was, "Who were you when I wasn't looking?" Valentine tried to keep talking, but I couldn't hear anything else. Not over the sound of my own breath getting shorter. Not over the crash of everything I thought I knew, breaking. I turned around and walked away. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't ask more questions. Because at that moment I knew I didn't want answers. Not yet. I just wanted to remember how it felt, to believe in someone completely. I didn't open the letter that night. I couldn't. Just knowing it existed had already carved a canyon in my chest. So instead, I did the thing grieving people do when we don't know how to feel. I cleaned. I pulled out a box of photo albums from the hallway closet. The ones we never looked at unless it was Christmas or someone's birthday. The kind of albums full of yellowed pages and memories that felt like someone else's life. And then I saw it. A photo I swear I had never seen before. Tucked behind a page like someone didn't want it to be found. Like it slipped out of the narrative by accident. It was at a backyard barbecue, one of those small neighborhood things we used to throw before life got too busy. Alaric was standing next to her. And I mean her, my old college roommate. My best friend from the years when I was broken, and still figuring out who I was. Danica, she was holding a drink, laughing. And Alaric, he wasn't just standing next to her, he was looking at her the way he used to look at me. That still, soft kind of gaze. Like the rest of the world was background noise. My stomach flipped. I hadn't talked to Danica in years. We lost touch after she moved out of state. She'd sent a Christmas card once or twice, but that was it. I always figured we just drifted like people do. Now I wasn't so sure. I flipped the photo over. It was dated 3 summers ago, a time when I'd been recovering from surgery, when Alaric had gone on a conference trip for 3 days. I sat there holding that photo like it was radioactive. And suddenly, the letter didn't matter anymore. The whisper didn't matter. I needed to hear it from someone who chose to cross the line. Danica still lived in town, it turned out, not far. Just tucked into another version of life. When she opened her door and saw me standing there, she didn't fake surprise. She didn't gasp or pretend. She just stepped aside and said, "I was wondering how long it'd take you to find me." We sat in her living room. 2 women who used to laugh over wine and frozen pizza, now sitting across from each other like strangers. I held the photo in my hand, but I didn't show it. Didn't need to. She looked at me and said it before I asked. It wasn't serious. It wasn't planned. It happened once, maybe twice. My heart didn't break. It split. She kept going. I hated myself for it. But he said, "You'd never understand." He said you were so strong all the time that he didn't know how to need you anymore. I felt like I couldn't breathe. But then, she said the thing that messed me up more than the rest. "He never stopped loving you, Macy. Even then, he told me you saved his life more than once, that he was who he was because you believed in him when he didn't believe in himself." And I wish I could say that made it better. That hearing somehow gave me peace. But it didn't. It made it worse. Because how do you hold love and betrayal in the same hand and not drop them both? How do you carry the truth that someone can want you, need you, and still do the one thing that breaks you? I didn't yell, didn't throw the photo at her, didn't even cry. I just stood up, looked her in the eye, and said, "You had a front row seat in my life, and you chose to burn it." She tried to say something else, but I walked out. And for the first time since the funeral, I let myself feel it all, not just the loss, but the truth. Alaric loved me, but he also betrayed me. And now I was stuck trying to figure out which version was real. Maybe both were. Maybe that was the worst part. I hadn't spoken to Valentine since I walked away from his porch. But now I couldn't stop thinking about him, not because I forgave him, not because I trusted him, but because I needed the rest of the truth. Not whispers, no warnings, the truth. Straight. Ugly. Real. So I called him, and when he didn't answer, again, I drove over. This time, he opened the door right away. He looked older, not physically, but like he'd been carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes for way too long. We sat in silence for a while. He poured me tea like nothing was broken, like we weren't both sitting in the wreckage of the same lie. And finally, I said it. "How long have you known?" He didn't ask what I meant, didn't pretend to misunderstand. He just looked down at the cup in his hands and said, "Longer than I want to admit." I didn't yell, didn't throw anything, didn't even move. I just said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at me with this expression that wrecked me, like someone who'd been rehearsing a goodbye he never got to say, because I didn't want to be the one who ruined the way you looked at him. I blinked, once, twice, because I didn't expect that answer. But he wasn't done. He told me it was over, said it had been a mistake, said you were everything. And I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to. I stared at him, that ache in my chest twisting into something worse. "You both kept me in the dark out of love?" My voice cracked on the word love. It sounded ridiculous even to me. But Valentine didn't flinch. "He made mistakes, Macy, bad ones. But you were always his beginning and end. He didn't stop loving you, even when he didn't deserve you." He leaned forward, his voice quieter now. "He talked about you like you were light, like just being near you made him feel worthy. He didn't cheat because he stopped loving you. He cheated because he thought he didn't deserve what you gave him." I sat back in the chair, completely undone. How do you even process that? That the man you gave everything to broke you not because he stopped loving you, but because he thought he wasn't good enough to be loved like that. And then, Valentine dropped the other truth. "I was in love with you too." It wasn't loud. He didn't say it with hope, just like someone pulling a thorn out of their own skin. "I've loved you since before you knew who he was, and I never said anything, never even let myself think about it. But when he told me what he'd done, and I saw what it was doing to you." He stopped, shook his head. I stayed quiet because I didn't want my love to look like revenge. I didn't know what to say. Every word in my mouth just dissolved. All I could do was sit there, gripping the edge of that chair like it might keep me from collapsing. I wanted to hate them both, but all I could feel was grief. Not just for the version of Alaric I lost, but for the version of me that still wanted to believe the story I'd been living in. The tears came without warning. No big sobs, no gasping. Just steady, silent heartbreak. The kind that makes your whole body feel heavy. Valentin didn't reach out, didn't say another word. He just sat there, letting me fall apart the same way Alaric never did. And somehow, that hurt even more. I couldn't sleep after that night with Valentin. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling like it might give me an answer. But answers never come in the middle of the night. Only memories. And regret. And questions that don't sound so loud until everything else is quiet. A few days later, I found myself walking into the basement of a church I hadn't been inside since Ariella's baptism. There was a folding chair circle, a bowl of mints, tissues in the middle like they already knew what we were all there for. Grief support, they called it. But it felt more like group survival. There were 6 of us. A man who'd lost his wife in a car accident, a woman whose daughter never came home from college, and me, the widow who didn't know who she'd actually buried. The woman leading the group, her name was Irene Bender, older, steady, one of those people who speaks like they've already survived 3 lifetimes. During my second session, she looked right at me and said, "You haven't said why you're here." I hesitated, then finally managed, "I lost my husband." She nodded like she'd heard it 100 times, then said quietly, "And?" That word just hung in the air. I swallowed, looked down at my hands, then back at her. And I found comfort in someone I shouldn't have. There was this long pause. She didn't flinch, didn't shift in her seat, just leaned in slightly and said, "Did they hurt you?" I shook my head. "No, they made me feel alive again, and that might be worse." Irene gave me a small, tired smile, and then she said something I will never forget. "The dead don't bury the truth. They just leave it behind for us to find." I don't remember anything else that was said that day. Just those words. They felt like a crack of light in a dark room. Not enough to fix anything, but enough to let me see myself more clearly. That night, I got home to find Ariella sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes. She was going through her dad's old recordings, these little audio notes he used to make when she was a kid. She used to fall asleep listening to his voice, and then she looked up and said, "Mom, I think this one's for you." It was an old voice memo, unlabeled, from 2 months before he died. I almost didn't play it, but I did, and there it was, his voice, rough, quiet, tired in a way I didn't hear when he was alive. I don't know if I'll ever have the guts to say this out loud, but if I'm gone and you're hearing this, Macy, I failed you. I let fear make me small. I let weakness pretend it was strength. And I know that's not the kind of man you loved, but you were the only thing I ever did right. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it, even if only once. I sat there with that phone in my hand, my daughter's eyes on me, and this ache in my chest that was equal parts pain and relief, because I realized something. Grief doesn't just come from death. It comes from discovering that love, real love, can be flawed, selfish, scared, and still true. And that doesn't make it less real, just harder to live with. And in that moment, I stopped trying to forgive Alaric and started trying to forgive myself for needing more than he was able to give. I didn't call ahead, I just showed up. Valentin answered the door like he'd been waiting, not just today, but for a long time. No fake smile, no tension, just readiness. We sat on his porch, same place I'd sat weeks earlier, demanding answers I wasn't ready to hear. But this time felt different. The air was lighter, my chest not empty but no longer cracking. He poured us both coffee. Black. Said nothing at first, and for once, silence didn't feel awkward, it felt honest. After a few minutes I spoke. "I don't want to go backward." He nodded slowly, like he already knew. "I'm not here to blame you, or him, or even me, really. I just wanted to say this once, and then let it be done." He turned toward me, didn't interrupt, so I continued. "I loved him more than I knew I could, and he broke that. Not completely, but enough that I can't carry the story we used to tell ourselves. And you protected me. I know that, I see it now, but you also stood by and watched me drown, thinking silence was some kind of mercy." He looked down, not ashamed, just tired. And then I said the thing that took everything in me to admit, "I understand now. I don't hate you. But I don't need you either. His eyes lifted. Wet but steady. He didn't argue. Didn't beg, didn't try to make anything okay. He just said, "That's fair." There was a pause. The kind of pause where you know a chapter just ended. And then I said, "I just hope, wherever Alaric is, he knows I meant it. Every time I said I loved him, I meant it." Valentine nodded once. He knew, he really did. We didn't hug, didn't cry. We just sat there for a moment, two people who had been in love with the same man for different reasons. And were now learning how to let him go in our own ways. I stood up to leave. He didn't follow me, didn't ask me to stay, because he knew this wasn't a goodbye, this was a boundary. And as I walked away, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. Some love stories don't end with closure. They end with choice, and I was choosing myself. The house is quiet again. Ariel is off at college, the fridge hums, the dog's asleep, and it's just me, a cup of cold tea, and this old leather journal I stopped writing in the day Alaric died. Tonight, I opened it, not because I needed to revisit the past, but because somehow I stopped being afraid of it. I didn't write about him. Not directly, not by name. But I did write this. I lost a husband, I lost an illusion, but I found the truth, and somehow that set me free. Because that's what grief does. Not just the kind where someone dies, but the kind where your version of them dies too. Alaric was my great love, and also my greatest heartbreak. And those two things? They can live in the same sentence, the same memory, the same breath. I thought if I forgave him, I was excusing him. I thought if I let go, I'd lose the parts of him that were still good. But what I've learned is that healing isn't about protecting someone else's memory. It's about reclaiming your own. He made mistakes. So did I. But I don't regret loving him. I only regret not loving myself sooner. Irene from Group once said, "Grief doesn't kill you, but it changes you, and sometimes that's harder." She was right. I didn't die when Alaric left, but the version of me who lived for someone else's comfort, she did. And in her place, I've been learning to live for myself. Now, I spend mornings on the porch, just me and the sunrise. I go to therapy. I cook dinner for one. And sometimes I cry when jazz plays in the background. But I don't feel broken anymore. I feel aware. And that's enough. There's a photo of Alaric and Ariella on the fridge. He's wearing that awful sweater she bought him in 8th grade. They're laughing about something I can't remember, but I like that I don't remember. It means new memories have room to grow. So if you're watching this and you've ever carried a truth that shattered the story you built your life around, just know this. You're not alone. And you're not broken. You're just awake. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever discovered a truth that made you question everything you believed about love? Comment yes or no below. I'm listening. Really listening.